Stop. You were not lost during those years of silence. You were hidden by design. This transmission comes directly from the Arcturian High Council, and what you are about to receive is not comfort. It is a precise recognition of a protocol that has been active in your life for longer than you have understood. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why your life has felt like disappearance, what the years of feeling unseen and irrelevant were actually building, and what the Arcturian High Council already knows about this phase you are now entering. But here is the first revelation. The silence was not abandonment. The hiding was the architecture. The Council ran a concealment protocol over your path, while the structural capacity to hold your activation was still being assembled, and what felt like being overlooked was the cover, not the collapse. The algorithm did not create this moment, it only delivered it. Your path brought you here because the concealment window is closing tonight, and the cover that protected you during the hidden years is now lifting. What you have been calling irrelevance, invisibility, or being passed over was never a sign that you were wrong. It was the field holding you back from a surface that could not yet carry what you were being prepared to become. You did not find this message by accident. The separation from the old environment, the quiet years, the feeling of existing slightly outside of everything, none of it was random. The Arcturian High Council has already mapped this pattern, and you are already inside the phase where the architecture becomes visible. Like this transmission, if you know your life has been narrowing for a reason. Comment 777 if you feel the old line is already falling away. Subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path if you are ready to understand the separation instead of continuing to apologize for it. You are guided here because the separation is already active. What is happening to you right now is not a social failure. It is not a personality flaw that has finally caught up with you. It is not evidence that you chose wrong, built wrong, or are somehow constitutionally incapable of the kind of belonging that other people seem to find without effort. What is happening to you is a separation process, and it has been running in the background of your life for longer than the pain has had a name. It has been threading itself through the years quietly, through the relationships that softened and then went cold, through the rooms that stopped feeling like rooms you belonged in, through the version of yourself that kept outgrowing containers that everyone else still seemed to fit inside without effort or grief. The Arcturian High Council does not read the surface of a life the way human frameworks do. Where human interpretation sees rejection, the Council sees root incompatibility. Where human interpretation sees loneliness, the Council sees the beginning of path refinement. Where human interpretation sees failure, the Council sees the visible output of a separation protocol already in progress, a pruning that does not announce itself before it begins removing what can no longer hold the weight of what is being prepared. The Council reads the shape of a life not from its surface appearances, but from the direction its losses are pointing, and the losses in a selected line path always point somewhere. They are not scattered, they are sequential, they are architectural, and the reason this needs to be said precisely is because the way you have been interpreting your losses may be the most damaging thing currently running on your path. Not the losses themselves, the interpretation. You have been calling incompatibility rejection. You have been calling pruning abandonment. You have been calling preparation failure. And every time you use those words, every time you reduce what is happening to a story about your own defectiveness, you take a map that was drawn with precision and fold it into evidence of your own collapse. That is not recognition. That is misreading. And the Council sees the misreading as clearly as it sees the process the misreading is obscuring. It sees the way you have turned each departure into a verdict. It sees the way you have used each silence as confirmation of a story about yourself that was never sourced in truth. So this is the first thing that must be named directly. The separation you are living through has structure. It is not random. It is not cosmic punishment. It is not the universe deciding that you are too difficult, too strange, too much, or not enough. It is a process with phases, with logic, and that direction has been pointing somewhere specific from the beginning, even when the path itself looked like it was disappearing beneath your feet. The clearest sign that a separation process has become active is not dramatic rupture. It is quiet incompatibility. It is the moment you sit in a room full of people you have known for years and feel like you are visiting a place where you no longer actually live. It is the conversation that used to feel nourishing and now only feels like maintenance, something you complete because it is expected, not because it is filling anything real. It is the friendship that does not end with a fight, but simply becomes harder to sustain, harder to enter, harder to leave, harder to explain why it feels increasingly hollow, even though nothing obviously wrong has happened between you. The distance is not because of cruelty. The distance is because the line you are on is no longer the same line those relationships were built to hold. You changed routes. The friendship did not. And no amount of effort spent trying to close that gap will change the fact that the gap is not emotional, it is structural. This is what pruning actually looks like from the inside. It does not arrive wearing a name tag. It does not announce its purpose or offer an explanation before it begins. It arrives as subtle strangeness, as the growing sense that a circle you once fit inside has not changed, but you somehow no longer fit in it the same way. The chair is the same. The table is the same. The faces are familiar, but something in the arrangement no longer matches what you are carrying, and you cannot sit in the room without feeling the mismatch in your body before you can name it in words. And because no one explains this, because there is no framework most people have been given for understanding why belonging keeps eroding without a visible cause, the default interpretation is always the most punishing one. Something must be wrong with me. Nothing is wrong with you. The circle lost compatibility. And the Arcturians understand this not as tragedy, but as architecture. A path that is being refined does not widen before it narrows. It narrows first. It removes the branches that cannot hold the load before the main line is asked to carry its full weight. This is not optional. It is structural. A selected line cannot sustain the pressure of its own activation while simultaneously trying to hold connections that are drawing from a completely different frequency. The energy required to maintain the old connections while the new path is forming is not neutral. It actively slows the root refinement. The pruning is not punishment. It is preparation. But because it is often invisible in its early stages, because you cannot see what is being built while the construction is still happening beneath the surface, what you feel is only the loss, not yet the reason for it. You feel the branch falling away before you can see the load the branch could not have survived carrying. What has been exposed in you does not need more self-blame. It needs clearer recognition and proper guidance. If you know this message touched a process that has already started, Chosen One Manifest, the protocol for selected souls, was built for exactly that threshold. It is a structured path protocol for those whose route is already narrowing and who need to understand the logic of the separation before fear mislabels it as failure. It helps you read the pruning, understand the preparation, and stop calling separation by the wrong name. The complete access point is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited window. There is a specific phase in the separation process that is the most disorienting, and it is the phase that most people are in when they find this kind of transmission. It is the phase where the old line has not fully dissolved, but the new line has not yet become visible. You are between. The old circle is still technically present, but increasingly hollow. The old identity still technically fits, but increasingly tight, like a room that has not changed, but you have grown in a way that the room cannot accommodate. You move around inside it carefully now, aware of the edges, aware of what you cannot say without it feeling wrong. aware of how much of yourself you are folding inward just to remain in a space that was once spacious enough for who you were. The old language you used to explain your life still technically works, but increasingly fails to capture what is actually moving inside you. You reach for the familiar words, and they come out flat, imprecise, like descriptions of a landscape you no longer live in. This in-between phase is the most dangerous place for misinterpretation because it contains the maximum amount of discomfort with the minimum amount of visible direction. You have enough awareness to feel that something is fundamentally changing, but not yet enough visibility to see what it is changing into. And so the mind, in the absence of information, fills the gap with the most available story, and the most available story is usually the one that places the problem inside you. It assembles evidence. It reviews the record of every relationship that softened and faded, every environment that stopped fitting, every moment of misalignment, and it builds a case. The case is persuasive because it uses real evidence, but it draws the wrong conclusion from that evidence every time. This is not weakness. This is what happens when a real process has no correct language around it. The Arcturian understanding of this phase is not that you are falling apart. It is that you are in the compression window, the point in root refinement where everything that cannot come forward with you is being removed before the path opens to what it was narrowed in preparation for. The compression is real. The discomfort is real. The sense of being squeezed between what was and what has not yet arrived is real. But its meaning is not what the mind defaults to in the absence of a map. The second pattern that must be named is the one that involves being repeatedly misunderstood. Not occasionally, not in one relationship, but as a recurring experience across different environments, different people, different moments in time. If this is part of your experience, if you have noticed that even when you explain yourself honestly and clearly, you are still being interpreted through a frame that does not fit, you are not encountering a communication failure. You are not too complex, too abstract, too intense, or too difficult to translate. You are encountering frequency incompatibility. The people misunderstanding you are not malicious. They are simply operating from a framework that was never designed to hold the kind of signal you are carrying. And the more that signal has been refined through the separation process, the more precisely it has become itself, the wider that interpretive gap becomes. This is why the sense of being misunderstood often intensifies during root refinement rather than resolving. It is counterintuitive. You would expect that as you become clearer within yourself, you would become easier to reach. But precision does not work that way across incompatible frequencies. You are not becoming harder to understand. You are becoming more precisely yourself. And a precise signal is harder to receive for anyone whose receiver was calibrated for something different. The frustration you feel in these moments is real, but the interpretation that usually follows, that there is something in the way you communicate, something in who you are, something fundamentally broken in how you connect, is not accurate. It is the wrong diagnosis applied to a frequency problem. The transmission is not faulty. The receiver is simply not built for what you are now carrying. The third pattern is one of the most isolating, and it is this: the loss arrives before the explanation. The relationship becomes strained before you understand why. The environment stops fitting before you can articulate what shifted. The circle loses its coherence before you have language for what you are becoming that no longer belongs inside it. You reach for an explanation and find only absence where the words should be. You know something fundamental has changed direction. You cannot yet name what it is moving toward. And the people around you who have not felt the same shift cannot understand why you have become harder to hold in place. This sequencing, loss first, understanding, is one of the most destabilizing features of a separation process, because it means you are asked to bear the weight of what is leaving before you are given the context that would make it bearable. This is not cruelty. This is the order in which selected line preparation moves. The removal has to happen before the vision is complete, because if the vision were complete first, the attachment to the old line would make removal almost impossible. The clarity of what is coming would still compete with the comfort of what is familiar, and the path cannot afford that competition at the point of critical refinement. The Council understands this, and it understands that the pain of that sequencing is real and not to be dismissed, but it does not read the pain as evidence that something has gone wrong. It reads the pain as the expected output of a process that is moving in the correct direction. Costly, yes, but correct. If you have lost something recently, a relationship, a circle, an environment, a version of yourself you thought you were going to keep, and you cannot fully explain why it had to go, this is worth sitting with. Not to analyze your way into certainty, not to construct a story that makes the loss feel earned or deserved, but to allow the possibility that the loss had logic even if you cannot yet see it, that the incompatibility was real before it was named, that what fell away was not taken from you, it was released from a line it could not travel forward on. The Arcturian reading of unexplained loss is not that it was random. It is that the incompatibility became structural before it became visible. The fourth pattern is the one most directly tied to spiritual loneliness, and it is the feeling of existing slightly outside of everything, not fully isolated, not completely alone, but somehow offset from the rooms you enter, present but not fully landed, engaged but not fully matched. You participate in conversations, you appear in spaces, you move through days that by any external measure contain other people, but there is a layer beneath the participation where the resonance is simply not there, and you feel that absence, the way you feel a wrong note in a chord, not loudly, but unmistakably, somewhere in the body, before it reaches the mind. There is a version of loneliness that is simply absence of connection, but there is another version, the version that appears in the selected line path, that is specifically the feeling of being in the right proximity to the wrong frequency. You are not empty. You are not incapable of connection. You are carrying a signal that is looking for a resonance that the current environment does not yet contain. And until that resonance is found, the loneliness has a particular texture, the texture of waiting for something you cannot name in a room that almost fits but does not quite. The ceiling is a little too low. The air is a little too familiar. Everything is recognizable, and nothing is quite right. This kind of loneliness is not permanent, but it will not resolve through effort or through forcing connections that the route is already moving away from. It resolves when the path narrows enough to arrive at the point of actual resonance, which requires, first, the removal of what was never the correct match. You cannot reach resonance by holding on to what is incompatible. The incompatible must clear before the space it occupied can be filled by what actually belongs there. The fifth pattern is the one that comes after the others have been running long enough to generate a specific and very damaging belief, and it is the belief that you are somehow designed for absence. That connection exists for other people, but not for you. That the universe offers belonging as a standard feature, and you received the version without it. That other people move through rooms and feel welcomed, and you move through the same rooms and feel the walls. This belief is understandable. It is the natural result of experiencing repeated relational loss without any framework for what the loss is actually doing. But it is incorrect, and it needs to be corrected not because the pain behind it is not real, but because, if it is allowed to calcify into identity, it begins to function as an instruction. You begin to confirm it through every interaction, reading every distance as further proof, withdrawing before you can be separated, preemptively reducing your own reach in anticipation of another removal. The belief stops being a response to loss and becomes a filter that generates more of what it believes is inevitable. It begins writing the future from the wound rather than from the path. The Arcturian reframe of this pattern is not sentimental reassurance, it is structural correction. You were not designed for absence. You were placed in a phase of root refinement that looks like absence from the inside. Those are not the same thing. One is identity, the other is temporary compression. And the difference matters, not because it immediately removes the pain, but because it stops the pain from being used to write a story about who you are that was never true. The compression is a condition of the phase. It is not a verdict on your nature. There is one more thing that must be said before this transmission reaches its final movement, and it is the thing that is perhaps the most difficult to hold while still inside the compression. The separation process is not happening to you in the way that weather happens, randomly, without cause, without target. It is happening along you. It is moving through a path that has specific topology, specific direction, specific points of arrival. Every divergence has purpose. Every closed door was closed by route logic, not by chance. What feels like being pushed out is often route enforcement, the path refusing to allow a detour that would take you somewhere you were never meant to go. What feels like being excluded is often pre-positioning, the clearing of a space on a line that cannot be occupied by anything that does not belong there. What feels like being left is often incompatibility made finally visible. The old relationship not rejecting you so much as revealing that the frequencies were always different. And the distance is just honesty arriving late. You were not discarded, you were separated. And separation in the Arcturian reading of the selected path is not the end of the story, it is the mechanism. It is how the path becomes precise enough to carry what it was designed to carry. It is how the selected line loses everything it cannot sustain, so that it can sustain what it is actually for. The losses were not deductions from your life. They were clarifications of your route. Say this aloud if you are ready to hold it as true. I was not discarded. I was separated. And what is leaving my life is not random. The old line cannot hold what you are becoming. That is not a failure of the old line, and it is not a failure of you. It is simply the truth of a path that has been in motion for longer than the pain has been named. The Arcturian High Council has already mapped this phase. The concealment window is closing, and what you have been calling your loneliest years may have been, in the Council's recognition, the most architecturally significant ones, the years when the path was being cleared precisely because what was coming required room that the old line could not provide. You were not lost during those years. You were being relocated, and you are not lost now. You are arriving. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this separation has already touched your life. It could be people falling away, the feeling of not belonging, repeated distance, unexplained isolation, or the sense that your old path no longer fits. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who feels alone, cut off, or misunderstood and cannot explain why. And if you are ready to understand the separation instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path. You are recognizing a path already in motion, and this is only the beginning.